Welcome to the FNO InsureTech Podcast, a place where movers and shakers from all points within the insurance ecosystem gather and discuss all things InsureTech. We talk about how technology and innovation are affecting and driving change in the industry. Here are your hosts, Lee Boyd and Rob Beller.
Hey, Podcast World, welcome to another edition. Once again, that's right. No matter how hard you try, you can't get rid of us.
Nope.
We're back.
Yep.
With the special annual ITC preview edition of FNO InsureTech.
How exciting. I mean, this is an annual thing.
This is like 5-6 times. I mean, it's many.
This is a big deal. This is a big podcast. This is the podcast that we come on and say, are you having a party at ITC? We need the invite.
That's right. This is when we shamelessly ask to get into places where we don't belong, where we have not been invited to.
Yeah. Or maybe it got lost in the mail. I'm just telling you now, you can invite us again if we are okay to be invited.
Mm-hmm. This is a lesson in how do I force my way in? And we're pretty good at it. We've done it now for many years, and we're pretty good at weaseling our way into things, aren't we?
We are. We are. Yeah. I mean, think of all the events at ITC that we've been a part of. I mean, there are some neat things. There are some neat events that take place at ITC. ITC is more than just speaking, right? This is where companies come, they throw big parties, you get to see old friends, pretty cool stuff.
Right. And we're going to talk today with the two founders, Jay Weintraub and Caribou Honig.
How exciting. I mean, the two guys, the brain trust behind ITC, behind InsureTech Connect, they're here today again.
We'll hear the intro story and how it got started and roll down and talk about all kinds of things InsureTech Connect. If you're going, you don't want to miss this episode. If you're not going, you don't want to miss this episode.
Right.
In fact, you just don't want to miss this episode.
You don't. You don't want to miss it. And at the end of the episode, towards the end, we get to talk about the current state of InsureTech. A lot of people are, hearing things in the news and funding and all that's going on. We get to dive in a little bit deeper into InsureTech 1.0, 2.0, maybe even 3.0.
So without further ado, here are winners of the FNO InsureTech podcast smoking jacket given to guests who've returned so many times we can't even count. Caribou Honig and Jay Weintraub. Hey, everybody. We are here with two incredibly special guests of ours. If you are on our podcast 5 times, you get the FNO InsureTech smoking jacket.
Yeah.
These are two guests who have gone way past the smoking jacket, right? I mean,
way past. Sorry, those are still on back order, by the way.
I was going to ask. Thank you.
Supply chain issues.
No, really they are. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are two of the most generous, kind gentlemen in our industry and in the InsureTech area of our industry.
That's right.
And that's Jay Weintraub and Caribou Honig, who once again have come to visit with us in advance of ITC, which is coming up in the not too distant future here within like a month. And welcome back, guys.
Welcome,
Thank you
guys.
so much.
Well, Rob, Lee, thanks so much for having us once again. And I look forward to that smoking jacket.
That's right. Me too.
We got you the medium. I hope that's okay.
That's terrific. I'm working on it, buddy. I'm working on it. I've been going to the gym.
And Jay, welcome back. Where are you today, Jay?
I'm on the eastern end of Long Island today.
Beautiful. Oh, Long Island.
Yes,
beautiful.
Yes. The last
Very
weekend
nice.
of summer out here in the East Coast.
Very nice.
What is the weather like out there today?
I mean, today is one of those just beautiful, beautiful days. Probably high 70s, low 80s, low humidity, not a cloud in the sky, very verdant.
Perfect day.
Are you in Montauk?
I'm not. Although speaking of locations, as I definitely change the subject. It was Watermill is actually the answer. But as I change the subject, speaking of locations, it's Caribou, who is in a completely new location. We haven't talked about this.
Okay. Where are you, Caribou?
I am in sunny Santa Fe, New Mexico.
That's the other part of the country from last time.
You took the big leap.
I took the big leap, was in Richmond, Virginia for 22 odd years, became an empty nester about 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
Congratulations.
Packed up the SUV with a couple dogs and my wife, not in that order. And we headed west, and we're now relocated to Santa Fe.
Why Santa Fe? What got you out there?
See, that's a great question. My favorite answer there. We've been visiting this place for like 23 years, since shortly after we got married. And it's just magical. It speaks to us. There's you can see 10,000 shades of tan here. Mm-hmm. But we always said, okay, how do we get out here? And, we had kids, and there's some questions about whether the schools were sort of up to snuff, not that many jobs, and quite frankly, a lot of old people. Well, now we're empty nesters, so it's not a question mark about the local schools. I can work remotely, and we're old, so it really works out just great. Yeah,
you've qualified, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if there are any InsureTech folks who are in Santa Fe and want to compare notes, I'm happy to grab a cup of coffee.
If not, you can found InsureTech Santa Fe.
That's right.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true.
I bet that franchise is available.
I'll check the URL, the domain.
Right. First thing you do, let's go to GoDaddy.com, see what's available.
Do you happen to know Julie Rochford, who used to be?
Yeah, that's who it was.
I do not.
We should connect. One of the most interesting, fascinating insurance people.
Yes, she was an amazing guest.
She retired to there. She's been on our podcast and ran the insurance. I'm going to get the name wrong. The Insurance Institute for Building Safety. They have the big wind farm. You ever heard of this? Anyway,
it's a giant building.
Listen to our podcast. But enough of this jibber jabber. Let's talk about you guys, what you're up to, what's going on. And let's just start by taking a walk backwards on memory lane, or a walk down memory lane, and talk about 2015 for a minute.
So I'll jump in here. I'm a little hyped on caffeine today. So we sort of talked this one through a few times. I don't want to belabor it, but I'll still belabor it. So Jay, you want to jump right in there?
No, I'll belabor it. So don't worry. Like if
okay,
if they haven't had enough, the great listeners haven't had enough, I will jump in and belabor it. So
okay,
but no, absolutely. So you should start.
2015, I'm a partner at a VC fund that I co-founded, QED, starting to focus on InsureTech. Smells like something interesting is about to happen in the category. Meanwhile, Jay is a successful event entrepreneur trying to figure out his next thing, his next event to create. I need an InsureTech event to go to, right? Meet the other investors, the entrepreneurs, the innovation execs. Fortunately, I get connected to Jay. And I'm like, I've got this harebrained idea, Jay. I want a InsureTech event that I want to go to, but it doesn't exist yet. Will you create this for me, please? And he was like, well, I've already got an InsureTech event or an insurance event I have in mind to create. And I'm like, darn, well, maybe I can convince you that you like my idea better. And I think much to his surprise, he listened to what I needed and said, all right, maybe that's sort of going to be interesting. And then the beauty of this, I'm actually smart, but really lazy.
Okay.
And I've gotten very good at riding on the coattails of other people who do actual work.
Doers.
Yeah. And so it's funny. I've discovered people typically think that I, created ITC, and they're wrong. I played a role. I had a nice little spark that helped it, right? And Jay actually is really the creator of ITC, but I am really the figurehead. And wow. So, people sort of associate this lovely, face of mine with a fedora.
Well, let's face it. Caribou's a much easier name to remember than Jay.
True. So anyway, so that's where it started from. right? Is basically, I needed it. Jay was looking to create something great, and serendipity brought us together. Anything to belabor there, Jay?
Oh man, sometimes you do such a good job where I just have to say, oh, that pretty much covers it. And then I still find a way to add on something. But I will say that, obviously Caribou becoming the face of the event was very genius. But he says this all the time, like, oh, I'm smart but lazy. And like, I don't buy it. I think it's a good way to disarm people, because you've never seen this guy be lazy. Because usually when someone says lazy, you think of them as less smart, and you respect them less. So I don't know. I get a good smile when he says that, but I don't buy it.
Not buying that one.
You meet Caribou, he comes to you with this name, or with this,
with an idea. But also with a name. Fair enough.
There's a slip right there. What did you think? What was your immediate thought? This is great. What the hell is this? What went through your mind?
Well, most people, that work with me, especially on my team, would probably just tell you how surprised they are that I ultimately went with Caribou's idea. Because the best description I've heard of me from my team is basically, you're immensely difficult, but not impossible. And so, given that I have the reputation for being just immensely difficult, it generally means I may take a while to go over to somebody else's idea. And I won't lie, it was a little bit hard, to do it. But I have to say that Caribou is anything if not convincing. And in true seriousness, right, there's certain things that happen in one's life, and you look at it and you go, boy, how happy am I for so many levels. And this is one of them, that whatever the forces that brought Caribou and I together, the fact that it ended up, we found a way to work together, how ITC, sort of has been going, truly one of the best things that's ever happened. So,
did it surprise you the way it took off?
Yes, it certainly did. It certainly did. I think Caribou and I approach things, fortunately, a little bit differently. I'm pretty much just an anxious stress ball. And so I could have told you all the things that were going on at any moment. And it's like looking at a ship and saying, any one of these rivets could come out and I'd be worried about sinking the ship. And Caribou, on the other hand, is sort of like, but look how far we've sailed. And do you see where we are? And, and so it's great. And I distinctly remember after the first year, we're at the after party. And this is before, we had big name talent. And it was like, you realize, like, this is what winning feels like. And it wasn't until that moment where I stopped and said, oh, maybe we're onto something here. Maybe this is something that is going to be like memorable and enduring. And so it is amazing to have all these years to then now look back.
Mm-hmm. And Caribou, was this experience similar for you?
It was actually transformative for me. And I say that because, I spent a decade as an operator. I worked at Capital One, a variety of roles, what I call my first and only real job before doing VC. And, doing ITC and getting back into a sort of operator's mindset, right? Now, again, luckily not actually having to do most of the work, right? Because Jay and his team would do the great deal of the work. But, Jay and I will still reminisce about when we would each get an email every time that someone registered, right, for ITC. Yeah, there was an old commercial a couple of years back around like a couple guys looking at they light up their e-commerce site and they start getting the sort of clicks and then bought purchases and like, and we would get the same dopamine hit, right, whenever that we saw a registration. And we actually got we were so upset, if we didn't get a bunch of registrations one day when we were expecting it. But the experience of actually helping to bring something out of the ground was just so personally rewarding. And then, and I get to play a supporting role as a venture capital guy, helping, give hopefully good counsel to entrepreneurs. But there's something different from like, okay, we had an idea, we agreed to like, okay, let's make this happen. And then it actually happens. The other thing, is maybe a little corny, but like from a sort of personal satisfaction level, I still go to the very first ITC and like took 100 paces back during the lunch hour and saw 1,000 people talking to each other. And like,
yeah.
And this is actually moving the industry forward. So I could not really get enough of that, which is, I suppose, why I kept hanging on to Jay's coattails as he keeps lighting up new conference after conference after conference. Because I still get a little bit of that dopamine when I get to play my tiny role and support them, and then get that email. It's like, oh, bing, another paid reg. That's great.
Was there a year that just accelerated the conference to where it is today, or did it just gradually happen, or was there like an event one year where you're like, this is the pivotal year, that was the change? And if so, what caused it to grow to the size that it is today?
Jay?
I can answer your question by saying the year that scared the crap out of me on multiple levels that I thought might sink our ship, and that was the second year. It was the year of the immense tragedy that had happened in Vegas prior to us, sort of.
I was there that year. I remember that.
And so I would say that was, right. It's awful. It's scary. It's tragic. And I remember after that year, I remember getting this like scathing email from someone that said like, your show sucked. And I remember thinking, oh no, we've, look at all this time and an effort that we've put into something. Is it not going to like continue? And that's the stressful part about our business is you basically get 3 days a year that you get all of your data points happening 3 days a year, and you spend the whole year getting to it.
Right. And as you learn, some things are in your control and some things are not.
And I think year 3, though, I mean, for me, year 3 was, probably the magic year, because that's the year where, there's a certain, I don't know, strangeness that happens when a show gets to a certain size. It starts to become, and Caribou is the one I think pointed this out, it becomes, the bigger it gets, it can become more intimate, because all of a sudden it can support more communities coming together. And, and at the same time, it's like roots, and it's having lots of roots being planted. And that to me was 2018. You really could you could feel what was happening. It was where you looked around at the people, the expo hall, and you said, oh, I get it now. Like, if I want to see and understand this movement called InsureTech, this is where I see it and understand it. And so I'd say that for me was probably one of the more transformational years.
Yeah, I think Jay's making a really interesting point that goes beyond, certainly ITC goes beyond events, arguably, right? It's the distinction between, the product and being a platform. Mm-hmm. And ITC, I like to think, has always been a great product, right? The speakers, the food, the venue, right? How we bring people together and so on. But it was probably around 2018 that it started to feel much more like a platform. Yeah. Because we started to hear about how other people were organizing their sort of activities, their mini events, right? A dinner, drinks, a golf thing, right? On top of ITC, and not necessarily needing to coordinate it directly, not as a sponsorship necessarily, just like, as long as we know that we're going to have all these people that we want to talk to at ITC, let's go ahead and organize this, right, on this day, this moment for these people. And, which then begged like an interesting business management question for the ITC team, right? How do you deal with that, right? Is that actually eating your sponsorship dollars, right? Like that would be, I would argue, the traditional event sort of antagonism towards that actually would be, no, if you're going to be building on top of our event, you've got to, pay us, our tax, right, as a sponsor. Mm-hmm. And I actually, again, back to the ethos of Jay and his team, right, the view was, no, when some third party creates a dinner or mini event or even some sort of like little event outside of the venue itself for ITC attendees, it actually makes the event a better product. It makes it more valuable for everyone else. Right? Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it's not about the nickels and dimes of, okay, well, maybe we could extract a little bit of sponsorship dollars from these folks. It's about, okay, focus on how do we make this great for everyone attending. Right. And if that means being perfectly happy with letting some third parties build, on top of ITC, then great, because that, as long as that makes it better for the attendees. And I think, again, that's sort of, it's a particular kind of mindset that an event real success for an event is not that it's a great product, but that it's a great platform.
I love that. I think that is so true. And I can see those years when it was an event, you went to ITC, you went to the product, and then all of a sudden you're now at the platform and there's all these other events that you can go to, and everyone's building upon it. And you've actually gotten to the point where you don't really ask people if they're going, but you say that, hey, at ITC, why don't we meet? And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. It's one of the few conferences where you just assume everyone's going. And I think you're right. I love that about the platform.
I have to ask you about 2020, because in my thinking, that had to be, and as somebody who's also nervous and stressed out all the time, like you, Mr. Weintraub, 2020 must have been a year you'll never forget. Obviously, it's a year that no one will forget who's old enough to have a memory. But for you guys, you're cruising along. You've come off 2019, which was an enormous year, right? Record breaking, and the world stopped. I mean, talk about things that are out of your control entirely. How did you digest that, and what did your strategy become at that point in time?
Let's see, denial, then anger, then acceptance.
5 stages,
right? I think that's
the 5 stages of COVID.
But actually, the moving past denial, right, was actually important, right? Especially when something like that happens that, you really, it almost strains credibility, right, until it's actually happening, right? It's like at my kids' high school, like, okay, they're going to be off for 2 weeks. Right. Fine. Then they're going to be off for another 2 weeks because, that second week is their spring break. So it's, buys us a little time. Right. And then we're thinking, okay, well, at least they'll be back after spring break. Right? And then after spring break, it's like, okay, we're actually closing down through the end of the school year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my gosh, how is this possible? Get me a bucket of wine. But then, but at least the next school year, they'll be in school. Right. And then the end of summer rolls around and like, no.
Yeah.
And, so I'm sure many other parents experience that same kind of rolling denial, right? Until it finally became acceptance. And then like, all right, what are we doing here? And with a little hint of anger in there. I think it's sort of really is kind of similar, right? That, and part of being a good, business leader like Jay is that you've got to recognize it early enough and recognize, okay, here's an inflection point where at this time, we're going to have to make a decision and figure out what we're going to do about it and not be in that denial stage, but move really fast into the acceptance and exploration.
Yeah. I mean, 2020 sucked, right? I mean, it certainly did. And I'll say that I think it also shows the benefit of, the humanity of it all. And it shows why it's important to have, like great people around you. Like there are certainly decisions that I'd like to think that we would have made, hopefully, similar decisions. I know there are certain decisions that we made sooner and faster because Caribou was in our lives, as an example. And that's true. It's true. And so I think about so that's like one piece is how do you think through the decisions that you have to make, and how do you say, okay, we really may not be able to do this. I think from what worried us, the most, besides just, wow, we're shut down, is technology going to disrupt the people business? I had spent 15 years as an event entrepreneur. Is all of a sudden like technology going to replace the skill set that I had been trying to hone as like a craft and render this time almost useless? So one of the things that I think was so ultimately rewarding is realizing that, like almost any industry, technology is an enabler, but it is not a replacement yet. And so getting a chance to hear and realize that human nature is human nature, that the getting together, you just can't replace it in the same way, was one of the most ultimately rewarding things, because that meant, I think we all want to know think about startups, runway, optionality. You just want to know that there is a future. And so the fact that the insurance and InsureTech industry, ultimately, quickly rebounded it in so great that people are people, then at least for us, the challenge was, well, what can we do to innovate? What can we do not just to keep busy, but to feel like we're challenging ourselves? what can we do so that when the time is right to get back together, we can all make, sort of like the most of it. So I'm glad that we can, in joking seriousness, say how bad it was, but also look back on it with a number of positives that that came out of it.
Give us an example of a positive.
There are certain things that we as an event business never really think a lot about. Turns out on our team we have someone who's won, and she never talks about it. And she's won, I think, been a part of 6 Emmys. But yet we did nothing with video. We recorded video at our show. We have an amazing technologist on our staff. And yet, so now we have nothing but a chance to lean into tech and lean into video. And I think about some of these things that we get to try, whether it's building our entire virtual event platform, whether it's, I think many tests on the video side that we wouldn't have done otherwise, without being forced to.
COVID was lousy and bad, obviously, on many dimensions. It's also a catalyst for change in a lot of ways, right? And some of those changes will be, I think, net positive changes. I actually wrote a little article once about COVID as a platform shift, like from a compute. It's almost like a computing platform shift, going from like the mainframe to the mini computer to the PC to the smartphone, right? Each time you have that computing platform shift, you've got this sort of some legacy ways of doing business become obsolete, right? And entire new like continents arise out of the ocean of opportunities. And COVID, obviously not a computing platform shift, but it has all the hallmarks still being a platform shift, right? And so just like the notion of distributed workforce, right? I don't want to call it remote work or hybrid work or whatever, just like a distributed workforce, right? Clearly, there are some situations now where there was inertia against it, and it turns out to be fine, right? It doesn't mean that everyone should work distributed and remote, but it means that some of the inertial barriers to it, COVID actually broke down those inertial barriers, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's other things where like, okay, in the event business, it turns out that meeting in person, right? COVID doesn't actually change the value of that. Actually, where it almost does, this will sound a little bit odd maybe, but to the extent that people are marginally reluctant to travel because of COVID. Mm-hmm. If they're completely averse to travel, fine, they're not going to a conference, nor are they going to go see some client, right? Or some partner or some VC or some entrepreneur. But if they're mildly averse and they're trying to pull back the amount of travel they do, you don't jump on 20 airplanes to go see 20 people in 20 different cities if you're a little nervous about COVID. Right. You jump on one airplane, go to one conference, see those same 20 people, and deal with it once. So I think there's actually these sort of almost odd tailwinds that COVID creates now, not 2 years ago, not a year ago, for the in-person event side of things.
I had an experience just the other day where I was scheduling a meeting that for years and years and years, I would have typically gotten on a plane and gone to. Without question, what day is good for you? We'll be there. We'll have lunch, etc. And when I reached out to the other party, they just immediately said to me, send me a video invite and we'll, sure, this day at this time. And so COVID, without question, and I think that it'll become clearer and clearer as time goes by, the major impacts that have. But I do agree with you that helps the conference business. That there's people that I'll see at ITC that I won't see the rest of the year. But pre-COVID, I would have.
You put on something I think is very important. A classic event, sort of like company, their way of thinking, if you think about yourself as an event company, their approach is, all right, we need to be more digital. And, when I think about COVID, and I think Caribou agrees, I say I in this case to not lump him under in case he vehemently actually disagrees, is that, no, we have to be not more digital, we have to be better. Because to sort of Caribou's point, I think the bar for going somewhere raises, the bar for going to a show raises. And so I feel like the onus is on us that now more than ever, our competition is someone's time of not being there. So I look at our job as how do we deliver value on your time? And that's what we try to hold ourselves to, is not any classic show, metric.
But from an event planning, event organizing perspective, it was really hard in 2020 and early 21 wasn't sort of navigating ITC. It was navigating that there were 2 events that were going to be launching at the end of 2020.
Right.
And so, ITC had plenty of momentum. Like we knew that if we didn't do stupid stuff, right, when people were ready to come back in person, ITC would be there and they'd be coming to it. Right. Mm-hmm. But trying to launch a new event, right, into the headwind there initially, okay, and back to the, denial and then anger, then exploration. Like, okay, fine, we're not going to have those events. We're not going to launch those events in October, November 2020. That ain't happening. But even then, like looking, okay, well, when can you launch it? Right? When is COVID, in the background enough and under control enough that it is appropriate to actually have your inaugural event, and still fighting against the headwinds of people's sort of appropriate reluctance and concern around that. Like, that's actually really tough, right? Back to I love getting things, there used to be a green field and now there's something we're building there. Mm-hmm. But, there's the downside of that is, it's a green field and for another year, it's just going to sit as a green field. That grass is growing.
And so tell me this, Jay, is it more important now to have more conferences? Like, are people open to the idea of going to more conferences and less to, customers' offices? I mean, is that something as an entrepreneur in the event field? I mean, is that something you're looking at?
I'm trying to figure out how to best answer that, because I think it still comes down to that. Yes, people are very interested in going to conferences. They see the value of conferences, but they're not interested in going to lots of conferences. So I think if anything, people are just being more selective and saying, oh, in the past, I might have gone to 10, 15, but today I'm going to go to 1 or 2. And so I feel like now more than ever, you just have to be that 1 or 2. And I do, Caribou, really enjoy the way you say that, which is, it's one thing to be in a position where if you don't do anything stupid, it will continue to do well, and it's another when it's, it's a nice position to be in.
I would like to talk about the state of InsureTech, and Caribou, I'll go to you. This year, we're looking at InsureTech a little bit different, right? Markets have kind of dried up. There's not as much money out. There's not as much capital. I feel like in the years past, everyone came, they pitched their ideas, and there's capital to invest. I think this year we're looking a little different. What is your thought on that? And do you think that'll have any impact on the way that InsureTech business goes about?
Well, we got about 3 hours, so that should be about enough time for me to tell you all my thoughts there on that. Right. So look, there is still capital available. Right, there's still venture capital, maybe not public market capital right now. I'll grant you that. Right, IPO window is not particularly good. I think that the VCs have become much more discriminating, much more rigorous, and I think it's quite frankly healthy. I think that we were all drinking, maybe not all, but many of us were drinking a little bit too much of the Kool-Aid around how far up is the sky. I think that but I actually consider it very healthy for the venture capital industry and for entrepreneurs and for InsureTech as well, that it's back to answering really just a handful of questions. Right? Tell me about your growth. If it's below 2x, that's not really that interesting. If you're talking 3x or higher year-over-year growth, that's great, right? Still interested in writing a check. Tell me about your gross margins. Ooh, that's a tough one for some of the first wave there. Yeah. Right? Unit economics, combined ratio, all variations on the same fundamental economic theme. And look, I think that I saw this in the fintech world in 2010, 2013 time window. I think we're seeing something similar right now for InsureTech, which is don't mistake scalability for sustainability. Right? For a while, VCs like to reward the growth, regardless of if it was quality growth. And in risk businesses, right, lending, insurance, right, those are the particular businesses where it's easy to fool yourself thinking that you've got a great business because it's scaling so well when you're offering to provide people, $1 at the low price of just charging them 90 cents.
Yeah.
Shows up in different ways for lending and insurance, but it's the same basic concept. And so I think that you're having an appropriate return to fundamentals on that. And then you get to, you got great gross margins, great unit economics, appropriate combined ratio. Great. Now let's talk about how big is big, how defensible is it, things like that. But I actually think we're about to enter an InsureTech 2.0 wave.
Yeah.
Which will look a little different than the first one. I think a lot of the startups, the sort of insured facing startups, will be looking at, okay, how do I have good unit economics from the start with an eye towards how do they become great unit economics in the long term? But they've got to have good unit economics early on. And one of the ways I see companies, the startups going that path is actually a lot more, I'm going to pursue a niche rather than everything. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to pick on Lemonade, but like they are the everything InsureTech company. Like every product, right? P&C,
right.
And life, and so on, and multiple geographies, right? So like they're really, really, really expansive in their not just long-term aspirations, but their immediate aspirations too, right? It's tougher, I would argue, to get that unit economics when it's really, really broad like that. I'm marginally involved in a jewelry insurance company and as a startup and another company that's focused on mom and pop truckers and commercial insurance for them.
Oh, wow.
These are, niches. Now in insurance, even a niche, right? It can be a pretty decent sized business, but their aspiration can't be, I want 2% market share, right? Lemonade, they get 2% market share in their TAM, like that's a big business. If you're going after jewelry insurance, right, and not as a cross sell, but like that's your business, you can't have an aspiration of 2% market share. You got to be saying, I'm going to be so great at this that I'm going to win, and I'm going to get like 20% market share, right? Mm-hmm. And if you do that, then you should have a really good business, and then you get permission to expand either adjacent products to the same segment or other insurance products to adjacent segments. But start by just kicking ass in that segment. I'm an independent director on Kin in the homeowner space,
right?
And I might argue that they start with a niche, right? That niche is oddly named Florida,
right?
Like that's their primary market as of today. Doesn't mean that's where they end, certainly, but it is, a very different strategy to say, I'm going to be primarily starting with Florida, right, and getting really, really good at what might be a tough market, right, to be great at. I'd say you have to be great, right, to succeed there. You've got to be great at Florida. But that's very different from trying to be, I'm going to be in 40 states within my first 2 years.
Right.
Different strategy, right? And I think that certainly in a world where sustainability of the business and the unit economics are being rewarded and even required, a niche strategy, a niche entry point might be the right sort of hallmark of InsureTech 2.0.
So talk for a second, because you mentioned now 2.0 twice.
Oh, no, that wasn't 3 hours.
Just give us definition of 1.0 versus 2.0.
So I'll start by saying there's probably a bunch of entrepreneurs, right, who would complain, right, that, I'm sort of putting them into InsureTech 0.0 or 0.1, right? The Guidewires and the Duck Creeks and, folks who were building real businesses, technology, right, actual is core to what they were doing, but it wasn't part of the wave that's sort of emerged in, 2015, 2016, where you had more sort of I'd almost say traditional sort of software entrepreneurs as opposed to insurance entrepreneurs, right, coming in, and you had non-insurance capital, right, software VCs kind of thing coming in to fund these non-insurance entrepreneurs. That's sort of the hallmark of InsureTech 1.0. And that's what sort of started. You could smell that happening in late 2015 which is why I started to lean into investing in it and said I need a conference to go to.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that we used to do when we started the podcast was we would ask people, are you an insurance company or insurance services company, or are you a technology company? And almost without fail, the answer was,
I'm a tech company, of course.
I'm a tech company.
Tech company.
I'm a tech company. And I think part of what you're saying is that today, many would answer that question differently.
Well, look, I'm first of all, I'm happy that I'm not letting Jay have a word in edgewise on this. This is a rare occasion for me.
He's sleeping. It's okay. He's taking a nap. But
look,
in the sun all day.
I've actually thought about this a lot until I got to an answer that was satisfactory for my own taste, at least. Right? What makes a tech company a tech company? Right? Because especially in insurance, but also back in banking, and I did some banking work, like you'd have that debate. And hey, look, is Google a tech company? Most of it, the vast majority of its revenue isn't from selling tech. The vast majority is from selling advertising. So it's an ad company, right? It's a media company. Yeah, I mean, it's actually one of the most popular media websites. It's a media company. But I think we'd say, well, yeah, true, but it's really a tech company. How is that? And my answer, and it applies independent of sector, is that you're a tech company if your default approach to solving a problem is to hire an engineer and solve it with software. If you've got we have a new marketing challenge we need to solve, do you go hire a marketing expert or a software engineer? There's nothing wrong with being a traditional company that hires a marketing expert, but you're not a tech company. If your default approach is to hire the marketing person, you're not a tech company. If it's to hire the engineer, that's the hallmark of a tech company. You have a compliance issue, right? Go hire a software engineer to solve for the compliance issue. You have an operations issue, right? And so on and so forth. Now, by the way, that's the default answer, right? You start and see if the engineer can solve it. If they can, that's actually amazing, because then the software is doing the work for you, which means it's rapidly scalable and very high gross margin in solving it. But if it doesn't work, and sometimes you have a compliance issue, you throw an engineer at it, doesn't work, go hire a good compliance person fast, right? You have a marketing problem, go hire a marketing person fast if the engineer can't solve it. But even then, it's not going to be nearly as scalable a solution if you had to go hire an actual human expert for it. So for me, tech company, if you solve through the software as your default approach.
So what's that say about 2.0? Apply that to 2.0.
Oh, look, I think that 2.0, there's still, you can be a tech company as an InsureTech 2.0, right? In fact, I actually think you have to be. It's the discipline. I think it's a different sort of mindset. And we talked about this earlier, like this sort of fundamental shift from growth at any cost, right? Revenue is revenue, terrific, to having the discipline that I'm going to solve these problems through software. So I'm tech, but I'm actually going to also be very focused on the unit economics of them, right? And where does that constraint point me? Right? Maybe a smaller short-term aspiration, so that I actually can still strive for this transformative impact in the long term.
Jay, any thoughts here?
I forgot the question, honestly.
I think that was a comment on me, actually.
Oh, he was waiting for that one.
Yeah.
I at least can summarize Caribou's statements, pretty well, though. We never know what the reckoning is going to be or when, but it was not there's always a return to some sort of normalcy. There's always some sort of culling that, as Caribou's mentioned, is healthy. And so I think what was always our hope, right, is that the movement of InsureTech has enough time to sort of, whether it's 1.0, 2.0, I'm so glad we're not talking about Web 3. That's a totally different story. All right, but there's at least you think about, does this movement add value? Should it exist? And is it enduring? And that, to me, is what's important, because that was established. And then, the rest, yes, should companies have to learn how to figure out to make money at some point in time? Should companies evolve to be a little bit more of actually understanding the spaces that they're operating in, et cetera, et cetera? All yes. And so I think that this is normal, healthy, and, it will produce, it will just produce better companies, and it is not stifling innovation. So I'm very happy that the checks are still going to be written. And I don't think it's a bad thing if checks are a little bit harder to get.
I hate when Jay is more crisp at saying something than me. It's so rare, but I hate when it happens.
You knew it was coming. I was going to say it was so rare, but you did it for me.
Oh yeah, you're never known for not being concise.
No, no.
But we're running up against time, and I really want to cover one other thing that's really important, and that is for me as a attendee of ITC and a consumer of ITC, I don't think about it in terms of this is an event. I mean, it's a conference, it's a convention. We used to call them in the old days. But that's your business, right? I mean, that's your business. Tell us about that business and what else you're up to there.
It is, and it's one of those things where we oftentimes, the reason I hate that question sometimes is, the best event, you shouldn't ever think about it. It's sort of like a high-end luxury travel. You go there for your own needs, and the entire thing exists to help you get what you need and what you want and what you feel you deserve. And the moment that you start thinking about the business of something, you're almost taking away from the value that you're supposed to derive from it. You're right. Absolutely. There is a fascinating world of what's considered independent show organizers like ourselves that launch events and run events. But when we think about what is it we really want, we want people to look at it almost like a mirror, and they look at this thing and they say, yes, this is me. But it's not one of those hotel mirrors that seems for some other reason to make you look a little bit heavier than you are or older than you are. Instead, it should be one that you look at and you identify with and say, yes, this is who I want. And so you're absolutely right that it is, our business. We make money in two very simple ways. People buy tickets, people spend money to have their logo associated with it. And, and we have the other thing that we've never talked about. Caribou and I are associated with 4 other conferences as well. But, as much as, and the joy for us is Caribou's words, catalyzing industries. People are our product. The magic that happens in person, the connections that get made, that's what drives us. But yet every show should feel like it is the only show and the only one that people have to think about. And so that's why oftentimes, even though we are very proud of our portfolio of events, if we're talking to people that are ITC, community, that's all we care about them thinking about. And we're excited that they don't even think about it as anything but it's theirs. It belongs to them, as it should.
So Jay's the real event entrepreneur here. As I think I've said, I'm just the smart but lazy figurehead. Look, I'll say some of the figurehead stuff so he doesn't have to. It's actually really been interesting building a bunch of what I'd call insurance adjacent events. So they're not insurance events, but there is some crossover, some natural sort of fit between them. So we launched one years ago after ITC was launched, focused on sort of impact of tech on the workplace, sort of transformation going on with HR and things like that. Right. And obviously, anyone who is selling commercial insurance, workers' comp, things like that, that's interesting. Then we've also got one on real estate tech. Right. We've got another one on logistics tech. Right. So you start to build up this portfolio and you start to see some patterns. And one of those patterns is the value creation of bringing together those same buckets of audience, right? The entrepreneurs, the investors, and the innovation executives from within the industry. And that's where the magic happens, whether it's insurance or HR or real estate or logistics. That's actually really interesting to see that happen over and over again.
That is so neat.
Well, we love you guys, love what you've done, love how generous you've been to this silly little podcast. And, we've had tons of people on the podcast, hundreds, and it's been thrilling and exciting, but it's pretty rare that we have people on who have changed the way that it's consumed, changed how it operates, created a platform for it to live on top of.
Right.
And so thank you. It's a privilege and an honor. And you guys have done, I speak for everybody. We're on the service provider side of the business, but I speak for all the carriers too, I'm sure, when I say that it's critically important. What you've done is critically important, and we thank you for that.
That's so kind.
Yes, way too kind.
Thanks, guys. Come back and see us next year, and
Thanks, guys.
We'll see you in Las Vegas.
Great.
We'll see you there.
What a privilege to have those guys with us.
Isn't it though? I mean,
every time.
I have been to ITC since 2017, I guess. They have really made InsureTech a name brand. And I love what they said about the platform.
Yeah.
It went from a conference to a platform. And now you go to ITC to do business and attend different meetings. And I mean, those guys really changed our working world.
For those of us in the insurance industry who go to insurance conferences, there's nothing like it. Because I'm an insurance guy, I consider it an insurance conference, right?
Right.
Like we just heard, might consider it a technology conference, but it's unlike anything else. And so my hat is off to those two guys and what they've accomplished, what they've achieved, what they've invented. Mm-hmm. And forever, they'll be able to look back with a tremendous amount of pride.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being on, guys.
And we thank not only Caribou and Jay, but all of you for being with us. Thanks to Alicia, no comment, Moss, and Al. I'll be there really soon. Muya. And most especially thanks to all of you for showing up, and we'll see you in Las Vegas. And until then,
goodbye, everybody.